Kia ora koutou, everyone. I'm Bernard Hickey, and welcome into a Mini-Hoon here with a brand new Substacker and well-known editor and foreign correspondent in Aotearoa, Anna Fifield. Thank you very much for coming on to a Mini-Hoon here.
Oh, kia ora, Bernard, and it's great to be connected with your huge audience here. And I just want to, at the top, say thank you so much to you for your encouragement and support as I start on this Substack journey.
No, it's wonderful to have someone who's so connected into the biggest story in the world at the moment, and as someone who's worked with the Washington Post and the Financial Times, it can't be any more extraordinary, the sort of global story and how it's hitting us every moment of the day in all sorts of ways. Firstly, the news just won't stop. Could you tell us what's happened in the last hour or so? Because when we first set this up, 12 o'clock was going to be the deadline for Trump's so-called end of civilization attack. But what's happened?
Yeah, so 12 o'clock was supposed to be that deadline for what sounded a lot like a genocide that Trump was threatening to commit. But fortunately, it is Tuesday in America, and it turns out to be Taco Tuesday in this respect, and that Trump, thank goodness, did chicken out on this one. He has agreed to a Pakistani-mediated proposal to give a 2-week-long extension to the ceasefire as they continue the diplomatic efforts such as they are. And very interestingly, the New York Times is reporting that the ceasefire was agreed partly because China made a last-minute intervention to try to de-escalate this situation, which was shaping up to be extremely bad, especially for the 93 million people of Iran.
Yeah, I was really curious about this relationship between China and Iran and also Russia, because as your Substack implies, between giants, New Zealand is in a really difficult position. Obviously not as difficult as Iran, but still our largest trading partner and our next largest trading partner are at odds across all sorts of contexts and parts of the globe. And China has played a really interesting role in the past in mediating ceasefires and agreements in the Middle East. And as you say, looks to have gotten involved here. Could you tell us about that, China's involvement in the Middle East?
Sure. I mean, as part of Chinese leader Xi Jinping's efforts to restore, as he sees it, China to its rightful place at the top of the world order, aka make China great again, he is trying to assert China's influence as an economic power, a military and particularly maritime power, but also as a diplomatic power. So he's come up with all these institutions and frameworks to make China a diplomatic heavyweight, and that includes by brokering agreements around the world. So we've seen that in Thailand and Cambodia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and also notably between Saudi Arabia and Iran a few years ago. These are the two big rivals in the Middle East, and it took everybody, especially the Americans, by surprise when suddenly China came out and said they'd brokered this deal. The two sides opened embassies for the first time in 7 years. It hasn't quite been all it's panned out to be, but it is a substantial diplomatic win there for China. So China definitely wants to be seen as this reliable interlocutor, especially at a time when the US is really unreliable.
Yeah, because if you look at the contest between these giants at the moment, it's China, which presents itself as the grown-ups, the long-term planners, the careful movers, the country that's got big oil stocks and which is madly decarbonising as fast as it can with lots of panels and batteries that it's making, versus the United States. Could you tell us how reliant China has been in the past on that oil from the Middle East, and strangely why they seem not that, desperate to reopen the Strait of Hormuz?
Yeah, so China gets about 13% of its oil from Iran. It has continued to buy Iranian oil despite the sanctions throughout this whole period. So it's a significant proportion of China's oil, much more significant for Iran. It sends about 80% of its oil to China. So that has had an impact, of course, but during the whole crisis in general has had a much smaller impact on China than on other Asian countries that are very reliant on the Strait of Hormuz for their energy supplies. So, for example, China has been able to get some of its ships through the strait during this crisis because of its relatively good ties with Iran. But also China has been stockpiling oil domestically to prepare for this exact kind of eventuality. So by some estimates, it has between 6 and 12 months worth of oil stockpiled inside China. So it can weather the storm much better than many other countries.
And it was the first also to ban exports of refined products, which has given it a lot more leeway than, say, South Korea or Japan, which are, luckily for us, still exporting refined products. The other thing that's brewing in the background here is this upcoming summit, maybe, between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump. Can you talk us through how that might be playing into the dynamics?
Yeah, well, it's surprising that China and Russia have both been relatively quiet about this whole Iran conflict. I think a big part of that reason is because they're adhering to the old aphorism attributed to Napoleon: never interrupt your enemy when he's in the middle of making a mistake. So they have been really happy to sit back and let Trump create chaos and prove unreliable and all these kind of things, and just thereby look statesmanlike or more reliable, especially China, in the process. So I think that's a big part of the reason for their relative silence there. But especially in China's case, this summit is definitely weighing on their mind and also on Trump's mind, for that matter. The two leaders, Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, were meant to meet in Beijing last week. That was delayed because of the war. They're now scheduled to meet next in May the 14th in Beijing. And so China and the US both really want this summit to happen. The US because it wants to stabilize these ties with China, having unleashed this enormous trade war on them and suffered the consequences, seen China cut off all its rare earths and critical minerals supplies to the United States and much of the rest of the world. And also Trump doesn't need any more problems or challenges on the global stage at the moment. For its part, China is feeling very strong and confident at the moment. It has proven unwavering. It did not blink in the face of the tariff onslaught from Trump, and in fact hit back very hard with those rare earths restrictions. And now it feels strong because it feels like Donald Trump is weakened by this whole crisis. He's seen so many traditional allies and world leaders criticize him or distance themselves from him. The economy is not doing so great. The stock markets, the bond markets are all in chaos. So this is all leading to China's, the view from Beijing's sense that the US is in a state of decline. Trump is leading it there, and China stands to benefit from this. So in many ways, they just have to sit back and let Trump come to them and show him a few nice palaces and treat him like the autocrat, like Xi Jinping would be, and just see what happens.
Yeah, so we'll see whether that meeting happens, but we're in the middle of this situation now where it looks like Trump has maneuvered himself into a corner, wrapped himself over a barrel, and now Iran has the United States exactly where it wants them ahead of this, midterm elections, where the last thing Trump wants is a, $5 a gallon gas prices, they call it over there. How is Trump going to get out of this?
I wish I knew the answer. I could probably make a lot of money off of that. I mean, I think, you've hit on a really important point, which is the two sides in this conflict are on totally different timeframes. Donald Trump is, looking at the midterms in November, desperately wants to hold on to the control of Congress so he can push through his agenda with those supporters there. So that's a very near-term, short timeframe he's looking at. Whereas the Iranian regime is fighting for its survival. This is an existential crisis for them. They have shown a willingness to bear almost any costs and also inflict a surprising amount of pain on the US and the rest of the world in order to survive this. So their goal is regime survival, and that's something that could be much longer term than that. So I think that, as we have seen over the past 5 weeks, the Iranian regime will tough it out, and never mind the price that the ordinary Iranian people continue to pay.
Now, the $66 million or $66 billion question at the moment is, when might the Strait of Hormuz open, given what we know at the moment about how keen the Iranians are to use it as leverage, and also how they've suddenly discovered they can use it to make money as well with these tolls.
Yeah, I think they're not keen at all. This is working very, very well for them, right? They've got everybody over a barrel, no pun intended, by weaponizing the straits and these shipping lanes through there. So I think, like, even if there is a ceasefire, this is not going to be enough for Iran to feel safe. You know, Iran, this is like the third time in the second time in a year that Iran has been attacked, bombed by Israel and the United States, and they don't want to risk this happening for a third time. So I think they're going to be wanting to look for much more of a enduring solution to this conflict than just a ceasefire, which would leave the doors open for the US and Israel to do it all again in a few months or a year or what have you. So I think they're going to keep those shipping lanes, sorry to say, under their control for as long as they feel they need to feel secure and to fend off any future attacks.
Now, there's a couple of countries in Asia that we've suddenly become very interested in their relationship with the oil supply chains and how they feel, what they're doing inside their country. South Korea and Japan, because that's where we get most of our refined fuel from. South Korea and Japan weren't quite as well prepared as perhaps China was, and obviously they're not. Neither of them are, communist dictatorships. So, what are we hearing from inside South Korea and Japan about, how long they can keep going and how long they can keep exporting their refined fuel?
Yeah, it's a very, very difficult situation for both countries because they are so reliant on these imports. They are also both security allies of the United States, and so are having to maneuver through that diplomatic relationship as well. And they've been quite tactful in doing that and trying not to antagonize Trump too much, while also, particularly in Japan's case, declining to help in any of these efforts. So it is obviously great news for us that they've continued to ship, but it's hard to see how much longer this could go on, especially so even if there is a ceasefire, even if, despite what I just said, the ships start sailing again, or the strait is opened, it will take a long time for the ships and shipping traffic to start returning to anywhere near like normal, because the insurance companies in particular are not going to be insuring these ships until I think it's 60 days after this ending of hostilities. So one rogue kamikaze drone flying across the strait could reset that clock. So I think that South Korea and Japan are going to continue to come under pressure, and that could have knock-on effects for us.
And not just news in the rest of the world, but involving us. Last night, our Foreign Minister Winston Peters met with Marco Rubio, and there was some coverage of their press conference afterwards, including at the end of the press conference, Rubio being asked whether the destruction of Iran's civilization was a war crime, which he walked out on, as did Winston Peters. What did you find out about what was said, and what did you think of how Winston Peters represented our position and expressed our national will, if you like?
Yeah, well, the readout from Mr. Peters' office was very much focused on the economic impact on New Zealand, and said that they discussed these negative impacts, and also that they agreed that the international rule of law should apply to freedom of navigation, to the shipping lanes and the use of them. There was no mention whatsoever of any other considerations or comments that Winston Peters may have made. So in my reporting this morning, in which I've written about on my Substack today, I've learned that Peters did not raise these comments at all, or these concerns at all. He raised no concerns about war crimes apparently being committed by the United States and the threats to bomb civilian infrastructure like the bridges and the power plants, which are clearly off limits according to the Geneva Conventions. No mention of the suffering of those 93 million people in Iran who are, already victims of this theocratic regime that many of them don't agree with in the first place. And also no mention of kind of the international rules, the things that we in New Zealand hold dear and which, in fact, really benefit us. We're a small country. We don't have military power or economic power. We have to rely on a rules-based order. So I think that's pretty disappointing that Peters did not take the opportunity to express concerns about the way this was done. Still to this date, we have only condemned Iran's retaliation and not the initial attacks or the ongoing attacks, including on schools inside Iran. So I think this was a missed opportunity, and I think many, many New Zealanders who are aghast at the human toll of this will be very disappointed in this. So I guess that's Winston Peters' kind of his vibe. And as one person who was familiar with the conversation said to me this morning, he didn't want to channel his inner Helen Clark. Quite a burn.
Yeah, it's a weird situation where we've got, a three-way coalition, various people commenting on behalf of New Zealand. We've got a Prime Minister, we've got a Finance Minister and a Foreign Minister, all with slightly different takes on this. What have you thought generally about how the government has, well, not picked a side, but not even really expressed our connection to the rules-based order and our long-running stance on humanitarian issues?
Yeah, well, maybe one of the very few things that Winston Peters and Christopher Luxon agree on is this love for the US and the closeness with the US and the reset in foreign policy that's more to realign New Zealand more closely with the United States. And so in service of that, they have both really tried very hard to avoid commenting on the basis for the war, the legality of the war. Even, yesterday, Christopher Luxon made his most forceful statement yet, which was that it's unhelpful for Trump to be doing this. So I think that I understand that we are caught between these two giants, and there is a need to be diplomatic in our communications with both China and with the United States. But I'm really struck by the fact that for the past few years and things, we have been mincing around and mincing our words with China so as not to antagonize them and risk economic retribution from them. And now we seem to be doing the same with the United States. The biggest country in the world, the promoter of democracy and free speech, the First Amendment and all this thing. And I think this is really disappointing and frankly quite embarrassing, because if we have a robust, grown up relationship with the United States, if we are friends, as Winston Peters says, we should be able to have polite civil disagreements and express our misgivings to them. I think that we as New Zealand, that's kind of all we've got in many ways, is our good standing in the world, our mana in the world, and that we could be using that. We could be banding together with like-minded countries so that we are, bigger than the sum of our parts, and that we have a real voice on the world stage. And there have been lots of examples where small countries have banded together in times like this. Take, for example, Finland and Sweden joining NATO in the wake of the Russian aggression against Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time when New Zealand, with Peter Fraser, was one of the people involved in the foundation of the United Nations. New Zealand was the nuclear-free country that effectively pulled out of ANZUS. There's been lots of times when we have led, but at the moment, as you mentioned, we seem like the country that tiptoes around everyone. Are we that good at tiptoeing?
I'm not a fan of tiptoeing in general, Bernard. You know me. But no, and I think it just really doesn't serve our national interest to be tiptoeing. We need to stand up for our values and our interests. And in this kind of situation, Donald Trump has lowered the standards of the United States, I would say, in many, and of the global order in many ways. But just because he's doing that doesn't mean we also need to lower our standards. We could continue to advocate for the international rules-based order, for institutions that benefit us, like the WTO and other international treaties, so that we can, be a little leader and a band of little countries together in the world, all singing from the same song sheet. So if we are concerned not just about the next 6 months of oil prices, but about the next 30, 50 years of the global world order, then this is the kind of time we should be standing up and promoting and defending. We should be acting as the guardian of that world order as it comes under a lot of stress.
So that's the sort of independent line. But, there might be some pragmatists who say, you know what, that whole rules-based order thing has just gone completely. And at some point, we're either going to be forced to pick a side, or we're going to have to make a considered national decision to pick a side. We obviously haven't picked a side yet. And I suspect with a lot of politicians, delay gives optionality and basically means you don't have to make a decision, and no one wants to make an uncomfortable decision. But do you sense we're in a world where, you've got China buying most of Iran's oil, producing components and all sorts of things for drones and all sorts of weapons for Iran and for Russia. Russia's providing intelligence support to Iran. China has just started flights again to North Korea. So you've got 4 countries together who share borders in one way or another, up against the rest, in theory led by the United States, although perhaps not very well at the moment. Are we heading towards a sort of a bipolar, the baddies and the rest, and let's hope we have someone good in charge of the rest?
Well, that's what China and Russia would like to see, especially Xi Jinping, but with Putin at his side, have been the standard bearers or the promoters of what they call a multipolar world order, where there's the US as the leader of the West, I guess, and China and Russia as the leaders of the rest. This has certainly got a lot of traction recently with all of these events. I don't think we're there yet. I think that the international rules-based order is not dead, that the global order, even what Mark Carney has been saying about middle-sized countries and rupture and what we can do, I don't think we're there yet. I think that we're in a stage of transition rather than rupture, and that we shouldn't give up. New Zealand could be defending the rules-based order more right now. But in terms of those other countries, the 4 countries, often referred to as Crink, that is China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, the Crink bloc, sometimes also referred to as the axis of upheaval. These 4 countries, it's a loose alliance, it's no NATO or anything like that, but are these 4 countries that don't share an ideology other than being opposed to the US-led order and wanting to see a decline in Western influence. So these 4 countries, they have been cooperating not really as a quad, but more bilaterally to help each other. And that has really stepped up a lot since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, where we've seen North Korea supplying artillery and troops, 2 of the things that North Korea produces that are wanted by the world, 2 of the only things. China has been supplying a lot of drone parts and dual-use technologies to Russia, and Iran has also been giving technology to Russia as well, including the Shahed drones, which Russia is now making into these very cheap kamikaze drones that they've been swarming Ukraine with. So now we can see these 3 countries are aligning themselves with Iran. Iran has always been the weakest link in this Crink axis, partly because it was so weakened by the June attacks of last year. But I think these countries see an interest in helping Iran right now. So they are rallying around Iran to one degree or another because of this, because it is this geopolitical great power battle in many ways.
Just finally, Anna, I'm always curious in the process editors and journalists have in trying to cover these events which are coming, thick and fast out of left field, right field, from behind you and everything. What are you watching, and how do you, make sure you're on top of all this stuff?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have a special connection to the story, I think, in that have been a foreign correspondent in Iran, in North Korea, in China, and in Washington, D.C. So, in a way, this is pulling together 20 years of reporting and connections and experience around these places. I spent almost 2 years as the Financial Times correspondent inside Iran. And so I have a real affinity to that place. So, I think I do care a lot about this story. But yes, it is exhausting. I can't talk to you about the news diet that you're on, but yeah, I just try to read as widely as possible. Obviously, all the big sources like the New York Times, the Guardian, the BBC, but also looking to see what they're saying inside these countries as well. So that's where like Substack is great for that, to see the people who are language speakers who can translate what is happening in the media and the official statements coming out of these countries, and just trying to understand not just what the United States is saying, but also the interests of these other various countries. So, yeah, and just good old, as much as I can from this little country at the bottom of the world, not quite shoe leather reporting, but Rolodex reporting. And hitting the phones as much as possible. And I can say that after 5 years as an editor, wow, I'm loving being back on the tools and
Yeah,
reporting again. It's such a buzz.
fantastic. I really appreciate you coming on, and I'd heartily recommend to all of the people who try to understand what's happening in the world. It's such a crucial time to subscribe to Between Giants from Anna Fifield. I'm Bernard Hickey from the Kaka. That was a Mini-Hoon. Thank you very much, and thank you, Anna.
Kia ora. Thank you, Bernard.